Deborah, you've written a big book. It's an ambitious book. It has a great sweep. Literally, the world is the stage, and you're raising big issues. So without any further ado, let's plunge in.
Okay.
What is your core thesis? What is the heart of the book?
Well, the book tells the story of two women. One is Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She's the Somali-born activist and the author of the best-selling autobiography Infidel. And she was notoriously threatened with death for her criticisms of Islam. And her polar opposite, who's a woman called Aafia Siddiqui, and she's a Pakistani neuroscientist who for a long time was the only woman wanted as an associate of Al-Qaeda, and was eventually captured in 2008 and convicted of firing at American personnel in Afghanistan. So the book follows these two Muslim women of about the same age who became complete opposites, and it tries to sort of tell the story of the war on terror through their stories.
Two women, such obvious extremes in their positions, and yet you talk about this weird symmetry between the two.
Yeah.
Could you explain this?
Well, as I said, they're about the same age. They came to the West from the periphery of the Muslim world at around the same time, the end of the Cold War, and they both were strongly influenced by Islamism. And even though they turned out, one becoming a critic of Islam, a harsh critic of Islam, and one becoming a harsh critic of the West, it's possible to imagine that they might have gone in opposite directions. Because Ayaan Hirsi Ali, when she was a teenager, she actually belonged to the Muslim Brotherhood. And Aafia Siddiqui, when she was a student at MIT in Cambridge, she studied feminism. So it's possible to imagine that they would have gone in opposite directions. And one of the things that I find fascinating about their stories is, because they're close in age, a lot of times the same historical events affected them in different parts of the world. And so there is that symmetry of seeing how the same events affected their lives.
It's fascinating. This is the subjunctive clause, meaning all kinds of possibilities. They could have gone in either direction. Now, you have a striking phrase, the bikini and the burqa, the virgin and the whore, and the need to understand one against the other, without which you cannot understand either. Now, what do you mean by this? Because this, of course, in a sense also sums up the essence of the book, in which you're looking at two such very extreme people, figures, polar opposites, and making sense of them.
Well, if you can't understand, if you don't realize that in one society the bikini seems natural and perfectly accepted, you can't understand how shocking the burqa seems to Westerners, for example. If you are coming from a society where the burqa is accepted and you've never seen a bikini, then you can't understand why the bikini is so shocking to, for example, people coming from Afghanistan or maybe even Pakistan. And so what I was trying to say is that if you don't understand the shadow, you can't understand the light. So I needed to tell both stories in order to give a picture of what roles women were playing in the war on terror and the whole issue of women's rights.
And how did you manage to keep a sense of balance between these two figures? You're coming from American society, obviously you're growing up in a very different kind of cultural environment to someone like Aafia, or even Ayaan Hirsi Ali before she comes to the West. How were you able to keep an objective balance or a neutrality between these characters?
Well, I tried to do it, and I've been writing about the Muslim world for a long time. I was a newspaper reporter and a magazine reporter before I wrote this book, and so I've been writing about the issue of women's rights and Muslim women's rights for more than 20 years. So it's something I've given a lot of thought to, and I just tried to keep my balance as best I could.
And I think you did succeed largely in trying to, because you're really telling two different stories which you're telling in a parallel way.
Yeah.
And I can understand that the story of Aafia Siddiqui here in America sounds very, very different to how it sounds in Pakistan.
Yes.
Because as you point out, the Prime Minister of Pakistan has called her the daughter of the nation. Yeah. There are hundreds of processions in her favor. burnings of the American flag and so on, and people blaming US imperialism for what happened to her. 86 years prison sentence she's serving. And similarly, the opposite for Ayaan Hirsi Ali here in the West. She's a celebrity figure. She's such a big name here. I found, Deborah, that by taking these two women, who both in their own ways have made such a mark on our times, you're creating two poles in the Muslim tent, as it were. But these poles are at the opposite ends of that tent. Now that tent is being held up by mainstream Muslim women. Right. Muslim women like you mentioned Benazir Bhutto, for example, who's comfortable both in this world, the Western world, and in her own world in Pakistan, where she wins elections twice and becomes the first female prime minister of any Muslim country. And then is eventually killed for being precisely that, for wanting democracy, women's rights, and so on. And there are hundreds of women like her. The first president of Indonesia, Muslim woman; Bangladesh prime minister, Muslim women; and of course ambassadors and governors and so on who are women. The new Pakistan ambassador to Washington, again a woman, a very articulate woman. My own daughters, one of them was a PhD from Cambridge University, became the first ever director of the only Jewish Muslim center in the world at Cambridge. Wow. The other one at Georgetown. So these are Muslim women, they're American, British, whatever, but they're still living in their own traditions and comfortably adjusting to the world. Now, the danger is, conceptually, if you remove the center, if you remove this pole from the center, the average reader who knows little about Islam, and there's so much controversy and debate and discussion about Islam today, particularly in the United States, the danger is that that reader may think that these are all that is there on offer, that Muslim women are either completely extremists, they want to blow up everyone, want to blow up the West, want to kill people and so on, and on the other hand, they want to reject Islam, and they say this is a terrible faith. So do you think there's a danger of, in fact, pushing the reader into that trap, almost the intellectual trap, or missing out the mainstream or the central pole?
Well, I don't think so, because in the book I talk about that quite a bit, as you know, that one of the frustrations that Muslim women have had over the last decade is that women like Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Aafia Siddiqui have crowded out their voices. And that was, I quote a number of women, including, for example, the Nobel laureate, Shireen Ebadi. She was particularly talking about Ayaan, and she said intellectuals like Ayaan Hirsi Ali play the mullah's game because they argue that it isn't possible to have Islam and democracy, that Muslims have to make a choice between the two. And Shireen Ebadi said, I don't agree with that. I think there's a third way. Islam can be compatible with democracy. And the same could be said about Aafia Siddiqui in Pakistan. One of the things that's happened in Pakistan is that women like Asma Jahangir, her voices have been crowded out, and she's accused of not caring enough about Aafia Siddiqui because Aafia Siddiqui is imprisoned by the West. So I think that's one of the most important points that the book has to make, that these are not the only voices, and we need to start listening to these voices in the middle.
Yes, because the danger is, of course, that these are such powerful, I would say, images of two women in these two extreme positions that could completely blot out the people in the middle. Now, of course, you'd also point out that both women have certain similarities, though they have very different political opinions. They're ambitious, they're bold, they're fearless, they're intelligent, both have their own charisma, that's why they have so much of a following. What do you think the trajectory is for the Muslim world, for Muslim women? The trajectory, as it were, for young Muslim women growing up in this post-9/11 world? And remember, the Muslim world is 1.5 billion people, so a lot of Muslim women are growing up. These models in front of them, where do you think that is going? Are they going more towards Ayaan Hirsi Ali, or towards Aafia Siddiqui, or towards the mainstream middle? Because, I have my own opinion, and I'd first like to hear yours and then talk about it.
Well, I think it's definitely towards the middle. I mean, to the extent that you can generalize, as you say, about such a vast population. It depends. I haven't noticed that Ayaan Hirsi Ali really has such a following among Muslim women. I mean, that's one of the problems that she had politically in the Netherlands, was that Muslim women were actually quite opposed to her. because she was seen more as a critic of